So if you were to strip off your shirt and just sprint down this narrow dirt path while two parallel lines of people beat you with heavy wooden sticks and leather belts, you probably wouldn't think of it as a good thing.
No, I mean, that sounds like literal torture.
Right. But historically speaking, you were actually being given a second chance. And today we are diving into a really bizarre, violent, and honestly brilliant history of how humans process fear.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic.
It really is. We are looking at a whole stack of sources today. We've got linguistic research, historical notes, evolutionary biology, and it all maps out the exact mechanics of bravery.
The mechanics of bravery. I like that.
So the mission for this deep dive is to really figure out how human history has given us this incredibly evocative, almost cinematic imagery to describe what it takes to survive and, thrive under pressure.
And the central premise we're pulling from these sources is it's actually surprisingly counterintuitive.
How so?
Well, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is feeling absolute biological terror, like hearing the alarm bells ringing in your head and then deciding to step forward anyway.
I mean, that makes sense, but it's hard to do in the moment.
Extremely hard. And to really understand how that mechanism works, we can't just look at modern psychology. We have to look at the language humans have built over centuries to articulate that whole journey, from paralyzing panic to ultimate triumph.
Because language tracks human experience, right?
Yeah.
We don't just say, I was scared or I was brave. We use these wild phrases born in ancient gladiatorial arenas or European folklore and even the roaring fires of the Industrial Revolution.
You think it's so visceral.
But before we can even touch on that kind of transcendent courage, we have to start at the bottom. We have to look at our initial, deeply flawed reactions to sudden danger, starting with our biology.
Right, the biological baseline.
Because when a threat appears out of nowhere, the very first thing that happens isn't a rational calculation. It's complete paralysis.
It is a massive physiological short circuit. And the sources highlight a brilliant, though honestly kind of tragic, 20th century automotive metaphor for this, being caught like a deer in the headlights.
Oh, yeah. It's an image everyone instantly recognizes. But the underlying biological mechanics there are what make it so fascinating. Like, why does an animal with the physical capability to run at 40 miles per hour just stand there and wait to be crushed?
Right. It comes down to evolutionary biology clashing with modern technology. Think about the evolutionary environment of a deer for a second.
Yeah.
It is a prey animal. So for tens of thousands of years, its primary defense mechanism against a predator, like a wolf or a bear in a dark, dense forest, has just been stillness.
Oh, wow. Just not moving at all.
Exactly. When a threat is detected, the animal's amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain, completely takes over. It floods the system with adrenaline, but instead of triggering a flight response, it triggers a freeze response.
Because movement in a dark forest draws attention.
Right. Stillness is survival. By freezing, the predator hopefully just can't see them against the brush.
But then you take that ancient, hardwired neurology and you drop it onto an asphalt highway at midnight.
A completely alien environment.
Yeah. And a car is barreling toward the deer with massive, blinding, high-beam headlights.
And against a 4,000-pound machine and 20th century halogen bulbs, that ancient biology utterly fails. I mean, the deer doesn't know what a car is.
Right, it has no concept of it.
None. Its sensory input is just overwhelmed by the blinding light. So the amygdala hijacks the brain, shuts down any complex decision-making, and just screams, "Freeze to survive!"
So the animal just stares blankly into the light until impact, because its own nervous system has betrayed it.
Exactly. And humans do the exact same thing when we are suddenly overwhelmed. Our prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning part of our brain, essentially goes offline.
Like, imagine you are on a massive company-wide Zoom call, just listening in, and suddenly the CEO calls on you by name.
The worst nightmare.
Right. To explain some critical failure in a project you weren't even prepared to discuss, you don't fight, you don't run away, you just stare at the webcam, completely stunned and unable to form a sentence.
Your brain is treating the CEO's question like a predator in the forest.
Exactly. It is a purely passive biological failure. But let's say you get past that initial shock. What happens when you are fully aware the danger is present, you manage not to freeze, but you still refuse to actually deal with it?
Well, then the human mind transitions from biological paralysis to psychological denial.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because this brings us to one of the most spectacular, spooky 19th century folk metaphors in our research. Whistling past the graveyard.
I love the imagery on this one.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Picture a person walking home alone at midnight, and the path forces them to walk directly past an old, overgrown cemetery.
Very creepy.
Very. And they are entirely convinced that ghosts or thieves or something deeply malevolent is just waiting for them in the dark.
But rather than sprinting away or finding a different route or actually confronting the fear, they purse their lips and start whistling a loud, cheerful tune as they stroll by.
It's cognitive dissonance in real time. They're projecting this ridiculous facade of false bravery just to soothe their own anxiety.
Which feels incredibly relevant to modern life, actually.
Relevant. Whistling past the graveyard is essentially the 19th century equivalent of that famous internet meme. You know, "This is fine, dog."
Oh, yeah. The one sitting at the kitchen table.
Yeah, with a cup of coffee, while the entire room around him is engulfed in roaring flames.
Yeah.
He's just projecting total calm while his world burns down.
It is a perfect parallel. In modern psychological terms, it's the intentional masking of a glaring threat. You see it when a company's profits are down 40%, layoffs are looming, and yet the executive team decides to buy brand new, expensive espresso machines for the break room.
Right. They're whistling to drown out the reality of the danger. I have a hard time completely dismissing that coping mechanism, though. When you are deeply overwhelmed, isn't faking it until you make it sometimes a necessary stepping stone?
How do you...
Like, if you are terrified, doesn't putting on a brave face actually help you regulate your nervous system enough to keep moving forward? Or is this research suggesting it's purely a trap?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the linguistic history positions both of these initial reactions. Being the deer in the headlights and whistling past the graveyard share one fatal flaw.
Which is?
They are entirely passive. One is a biological failure, the other is psychological masking, but neither actually alters the reality of the threat. The car is still going to hit the deer, the cemetery is still there, the fire is still burning the room.
So ignoring it doesn't fix it.
Right. The sources argue that if you stay in that state of denial, it is absolutely a trap. True courage requires the agonizing transition from a passive reaction to active confrontation.
Because you can't just whistle forever. Eventually you run out of breath, or the path forces you to stop walking past the danger and actually step into it. You have to choose your arena.
You do.
And the language our ancestors developed to describe this shift is brutal. We're talking about the idiom of stepping into the lion's den.
This is a metaphor with incredibly deep, visceral roots. It echoes the biblical story of Daniel, of course, but it's heavily anchored in the terrifying reality of gladiatorial arenas in ancient Rome.
We use the phrase casually today, but think about the literal environment it describes.
It's sensory overload in the worst possible way.
Walking into a dark, enclosed pit that reeks of iron and dirt, surrounded by starving, aggressive apex predators. There is no escape hatch. There's no whistling your way out of it.
None. You are intentionally walking into an enclosed space with creatures whose singular biological imperative is to tear you apart.
To do that voluntarily represents a monumental shift in human psychology. You are no longer freezing on the highway. You are deliberately entering a fiercely hostile environment where you know for a fact you will be attacked.
You are giving up the safety of avoidance.
It's the moment you finally draft the email, confronting a highly toxic, manipulative manager, and you deliberately click send.
Oh, that drop in your stomach.
Right, or clicking join meeting on a virtual call where you know a client is about to scream at you for an hour. You are stepping into the hostility on purpose. You have chosen the arena.
But merely entering the den isn't the resolution of the conflict.
No, it's just the start.
Once you are in that hostile environment, the collective group often recognizes a massive problem, but they need someone to actually execute the solution. Someone has to take on a task so dangerous that everyone else is just paralyzed.
Which brings us to a phrase I honestly hadn't thought much about until reading these sources. Who is going to bell the cat?
Yeah, this one comes straight from Aesop's fables, and it perfectly illustrates the chasm between strategy and execution.
Remind me how the fable goes.
So it describes a colony of mice living in constant terror of a stealthy house cat that just keeps hunting them down. The mice hold a council to figure out how to survive.
Right, and a young, enthusiastic mouse stands up and proposes an objectively brilliant strategic plan.
Sounds familiar.
He says, "We just need to tie a loud metal bell around the cat's neck. That way, whenever it moves, the bell will ring, we'll hear it coming from a mile away, and we can easily escape."
And the entire council of mice erupts in cheers. It's a flawless whiteboard strategy.
Flawless. Until an old, battle-scarred mouse stands up and asks the critical, devastating question. Yes, it is a wonderful plan, but who is actually going to bell the cat?
And the room goes dead silent.
Because tying that bell means one mouse has to walk directly up to the killer cat, physically touch it, and secure the collar.
It is a suicidal execution of a perfect strategy.
So idiomatically, volunteering to bell the cat means taking on an impossibly dangerous high-risk task that benefits the entire group but requires massive personal sacrifice.
Like being the first employee to officially report widespread harassment to HR.
Exactly. Every single person in the department knows it needs to be done. Everyone agrees it's a great idea. But who is going to sign their name on the complaint?
It's terrifying.
So what does this all mean for you and me listening to this? Are these idioms just romanticizing self-sacrifice? In a modern corporate environment, or even in a complex family dynamic, is being the one to bell the cat actually a smart move? Or does it just guarantee you become a giant target?
Well, the historical sources are unflinchingly realistic about this. Volunteering absolutely makes you a target. There is no romanticizing the immediate consequences here.
So no good deed goes unpunished.
Pretty much. If you step up to bell the cat, you guarantee massive, focused retaliation. You will draw the ire of management, the judgment of the group, or the teeth of the predator you are facing.
It's not a fairy tale. You don't just tie the bell on the cat and then everyone lives happily ever after in the next frame. By stepping forward, you absorb the damage meant for the group.
Exactly. Which brings us to the most grueling stage of courage. If you have the audacity to volunteer for the sacrifice, you must possess the fortitude to endure the punishment that inevitably follows.
And the language our ancestors used to describe enduring that sustained attack is harrowing. If you've abandoned your denial, stepped into the lion's den, and volunteered to bell the cat, your reward is that you now have to run the gauntlet.
Which brings us back to the image we started the show with.
Yes. It is arguably one of the most intense military metaphors in the English language.
Its origins lie in the 17th century Swedish military. It stems from the word getlopp, which translates to lane run.
Right. And it was a severe form of corporal punishment for a soldier who had committed a crime.
And the mechanics of the punishment are deeply psychological, not just physical. The soldier's entire regiment, his peers, his friends, the men he fights alongside, would form two long parallel lines facing each other, creating a narrow path down the middle.
And the guilty soldier had to strip off his shirt and physically run down that narrow dirt path.
As he ran, every single soldier in those lines was ordered to strike him. They used heavy wooden sticks, whips, or leather belts.
That is just brutal.
It was a prolonged, agonizing sequence of attacks coming from multiple directions at once.
The psychological weight of being beaten by your own team is staggering, but the crucial caveat of the Gatlop was that if the soldier managed to stay on his feet, endure the beating, and make it to the end of the line, his sins were officially forgiven.
His resilience wiped the slate clean.
So today, we use running the gauntlet to describe surviving a severe, exhausting sequence of harsh criticism or intense questioning.
Yeah, if you've ever had to present a controversial strategy to a boardroom of hostile stakeholders who pick apart every single sentence you say for 2 hours.
You have run a modern gauntlet.
Exactly, but to successfully run that gauntlet without completely breaking down, raw human biology simply isn't enough.
Right, because our nervous system is incredibly fragile. Under sustained attack, your body floods with cortisol, your hands shake, your voice wavers.
The human nervous system is designed to panic and retreat from pain.
So to describe the courage needed to survive, humanity had to look past biology and borrow language from the Industrial Revolution and metallurgy. We realized that flesh and nerves aren't enough. To survive, you must forge nerves of steel.
Think about the physics of metallurgy for a second. Raw iron is brittle, but steel is an alloy forged in roaring thousands of degree fires.
Carbon is forced into the iron matrix under immense heat and pressure.
Yes, and the resulting metal is impenetrable. It is unbreakable. And most importantly, its structural integrity is completely unaffected by stress.
So to say someone has nerves of steel means they possess an almost unnatural level of focus. They remain absolutely calm and unflinching in the face of terrifying pressure.
Completely overriding their biological urge to tremble.
Like a surgeon operating on a microscopic blood vessel when an unexpected hemorrhage occurs. The monitors are blaring, everyone in the room is panicking, but the surgeon's hands do not shake a single millimeter.
That's a perfect example.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Having nerves of steel describes an internal mental state. It's what's happening inside your head. But courage also requires a physical, external manifestation of that internal state. You have to physically hold your position.
Yes, which leads to a cornerstone infantry metaphor, holding your ground.
To understand the gravity of this phrase, try to imagine the physics of historical warfare. You are a foot soldier standing in a muddy field holding a spear.
Okay, setting a scene.
And you are watching a massive line of heavy cavalry horses, heavily armored, charging towards you at 30 miles an hour.
Terrifying.
The kinetic energy is unthinkable. The ground under your boots is literally vibrating.
The sensory input of that moment is designed to break the human mind. The noise, the speed, the sheer mass of the animals. Every single ounce of biological instinct is screaming at that soldier to drop the heavy spear, turn around, and run for his life.
But the mechanics of a shield wall dictate that if one soldier panics and runs, a gap opens.
And the cavalry exploits the gap.
The entire formation collapses from the inside out, and everyone dies. To survive, those soldiers have to lock their heavy wooden shields together, brace their legs deep in the dirt, and stubbornly refuse to yield a single inch of ground. They have to absorb the impact.
In our daily lives, holding your ground or standing your ground means bravely refusing to retreat from your position when facing overwhelming threats.
It's the project manager who refuses to compress a safety testing timeline, even when the executive team is screaming that the product must launch tomorrow.
Exactly.
I want to push back on the implications of this imagery, though. Nerves of steel, locking your shield against a cavalry charge, suppressing your tremors. It sounds like the only way to be truly courageous is to physically suppress our humanity.
I can see how it sounds that way.
Right. Like, do we have to just turn off our emotions and act like unfeeling robots to lead effectively? Isn't feeling the fear necessary?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the sources actually suggest the exact opposite. Courage isn't about becoming a sociopathic, unfeeling machine. The soldier watching those horses charge is utterly terrified.
Right, his cortisol is spiking.
His biology is screaming at him to flee. Holding your ground is profound specifically because it happens despite that overwhelming urge to run. It proves that resilience is a conscious, agonizing choice.
Oh, wow.
It is the active management of terror for the greater good, not the erasure of it.
That is a crucial distinction. It's planting your feet when everything inside your DNA says run. It is the mastery of fear, not the absence of it.
Which brings us to the absolute pinnacle of bravery described in our sources. We've mapped out defensive courage, bracing for an attack, surviving a gauntlet, holding the line. But the ultimate expression of courage isn't defensive.
It's offensive.
It is the moment of total risk.
The ultimate leap. The realization that merely bracing for impact isn't enough, and that you have to abandon all fear and throw caution to the wind.
This is a breathtaking nautical metaphor based on the sheer physics of sailing a square-rigged ship in a violent squall.
Okay, break that down for us.
During a massive storm, the wind exerts incredible force on a ship. A cautious, fearful captain is naturally going to prioritize safety above all else. They will order the crew to take down the massive canvas sails and tie them tightly to the yards.
Because if a sudden gust of wind catches hundreds of square feet of canvas during a storm, the aerodynamic force could literally snap a solid oak mast in half.
Or capsize the vessel entirely. Tying the sails down is the rational, safe option to prevent catastrophic destruction.
But safety means you have no propulsion.
Exactly. A brave, perhaps reckless captain realizes that they need maximum speed to escape the storm or reach their destination. So, in the middle of the gale, he makes a radical decision.
He orders the crew to unfurl the massive sails.
He completely lets go of the restraining ropes. He metaphorically and almost literally takes his caution and throws it into the violent wind.
The wind violently catches the canvas, the ship violently surges forward, pitching through the waves at a terrifying speed. The captain accepts the absolute binary risk of total destruction for the chance of ultimate triumph.
And today, we use it to describe completely abandoning rational hesitation and taking a wholehearted leap into the unknown.
It's the person who quits a stable, high-paying corporate job they've held for 20 years to bootstrap a wildly risky startup using their life savings. They let go of the ropes.
Yes.
I love the mechanics of this, but I have to play devil's advocate here. The linguistic notes frame this as the ultimate triumph of the human spirit. But where's the line between profound offensive bravery and just being a foolish captain who breaks his own mast and sinks his ship?
That's a fair question.
Isn't throwing caution to the wind just pure recklessness masquerading as courage?
This raises an important question, and it is the exact crux of this final metaphor. Throwing caution to the wind isn't about ignoring danger because you are ignorant of it. It's about reaching a critical strategic realization. Sometimes the safe route is the actual threat to your survival or your potential.
Wow. The safety itself becomes the danger.
Precisely. Keeping the sails tied down will definitely save the mast from snapping. But without speed, the storm might batter the ship to pieces anyway, or you might starve before reaching port.
Right, so the captain knows exactly how dangerous the wind is.
But they consciously decide that the risk of destruction is worth the possibility of extraordinary success. It is the profound moment where you recognize that your own hesitation is a heavier anchor than the risk you are afraid of.
That is an incredible way to frame it. I mean, think about the massive journey these sources just took us on.
It's a lot of ground covered.
From the paralyzing biological short circuit of a deer caught in blinding headlights, moving through the eerie cognitive dissonance of whistling past a dark graveyard, choosing to actively step into the sensory overload of a pit of starving lions.
Volunteering for the suicidal mission of belling the cat.
Yes, and then enduring the brutal physical punishment of a 17th century Swedish lane run, forging your trembling biology into steel, bracing your legs to absorb the kinetic impact of a cavalry charge, all the way to the sheer, breathtaking offensive bravery of a ship captain throwing his restraint into a violent storm.
It is an epic mapping of human psychology. And the greatest takeaway here is that these aren't just archaic phrases to memorize. This language is a practical tool.
How so?
By understanding the historical and biological mechanics behind these idioms, you gain a high-definition vocabulary for your own life.
You can actually diagnose your own fear.
Exactly. When you understand why your brain is freezing up on a Zoom call, you can recognize it as a biological misfire rather than a personal failure.
Right. And when you know you are actively running a gauntlet at work, you can contextualize the pain and some of the nerves of steel required to survive it. It gives shape to the invisible internal battles we fight every single day.
It really does. It provides a blueprint for resilience.
Which leaves me with one final provocative thought to mull over. We've seen how our idioms for courage have continuously evolved to match the technology of their time.
Yeah, from ancient Roman beasts to 17th century infantry tactics to the fires of the Industrial Revolution, right up to 20th century automotive headlights.
The language adapts to the threats of the era.
It maps perfectly onto our technological progression.
So what comes next? In our modern, hyper-connected digital age, what new metaphors and idioms are we going to create to describe the ultimate acts of bravery?
That's a great question.
When the threat isn't a physical lion or a wooden stick, but the infinite permanent memory of the internet or the overwhelming complexity of artificial intelligence, what does stepping into the lion's den look like in the vocabulary of tomorrow?
It is a fascinating frontier to consider.
When your brain sounds that alarm and your cortisol spikes, what new words will our grandchildren use to describe the choice to step forward into the unknown?
Something to think about the next time you feel that physiological reaction.
Yeah, when your heart rate spikes and the alarm bell rings, are you going to freeze in the headlights or are you going to unfurl the sails? That's all for today's deep dive. We see you next time. You know, usually when we talk about human biology, or we look at a medical diagnosis, there is this underlying expectation of precision.
Right. It feels like engineering.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like if you fall and break your arm, you go to the hospital, they put you in an x-ray machine and boom, there it is, a jagged white line on a black background.
Yeah, the doctor just points at it and says, well, there is the problem.
Right. Broken or not broken.
Ugh.
It's entirely binary.
And it's visible, it's quantifiable. We inherently crave that kind of categorization because, well, it gives us an illusion of total control over the human condition.
Which is so comforting.
Totally. If we can see the structural failure, we understand it. We can cast it, set it, and predict the healing timeline down to the week.
But, and this is the fascinating part, the moment you step out of orthopedics and into the world of human emotion, specifically into the mechanics of fear and courage, that entire diagnostic machine just breaks down.
Oh, completely. It falls apart.
We're suddenly looking at a psychological landscape that is incredibly murky. I mean, sure, you can put a person in a functional MRI machine.
Right, and you can watch their amygdala light up like a Christmas tree when they are terrified.
Yeah, you can measure the cortisol in their bloodstream, but you cannot point to the exact pixel on a brain scan where, the panic ends and the bravery begins.
Because courage isn't a biological baseline. It just isn't. Fear is an unavoidable, hardwired instinct. It's the absolute oldest software running in our nervous system.
The default setting.
Exactly. Courage, however, is a cognitive override of that system. It isn't just the absence of fear, which is a massive misconception people have.
Right, people think the bravest individuals just feel nothing, like they're robots.
Yeah, but in reality, courage is the active, incredibly complex process of experiencing absolute biological terror and then deciding to move forward anyway.
And mapping out that specific process, that cognitive override, is exactly what we're diving into today. Welcome to the Deep Dives.
Glad to be here.
Since we can't rely on an X-ray to show us what courage looks like, we are looking at something arguably just as precise today, which is language.
I love this approach.
It's so cool, right? We're exploring how the English language has mapped the intricate mechanics of bravery and terror over centuries. We have this amazing source material today that looks at a linguistic evolution using incredibly vivid cinematic imagery.
Imagery drawn straight from our collective history, to explain exactly how we process a threat.
Right. What is genuinely fascinating about this is that everyday idioms aren't just colorful phrases.
No, they're literal psychological time capsules.
Yeah, we use them constantly without even thinking about the deep historical and neurobiological truth they contain.
And they draw from everything. Ancient Roman gladiator arenas, medieval military punishments.
The roaring blast furnaces of the Industrial Revolution.
Right, and deep nautical history. It's wild.
It really is a map of the human psyche hidden in plain sight. So as we go through this, I want you listening to think about your own default settings.
Yeah, that's a good framing.
When that internal biological alarm goes off, whether you are staring down a hostile boardroom, facing a massive financial loss, or standing on the precipice of a completely terrifying life change, what actually happens in your nervous system?
Do you lock up? Do you try to hide?
Or do you find a way to step forward? Because to understand how we step forward, we first have to understand the baseline of failure.
We do. We have to examine the immediate physiological onset of fear and the ways our ancient biology completely misfires when confronted with modern problems.
Which brings us perfectly to our first piece of imagery from the 20th century. It instantly and perfectly captures this neurobiological failure. We say someone is caught like a deer in the headlights.
A classic phrase.
We throw it around casually all the time to describe someone who just looks surprised. But the actual mechanics of what is happening in that moment are equal parts brilliant and totally tragic.
Well, let's break down the evolutionary biology of the deer for a second. A deer is a prey animal that has spent millions of years optimizing a highly specific defense mechanism.
I guess apex predators, right?
Exactly. If you think about wolves or bears in a dense, dark, ancient forest, those predators rely heavily on their visual cortex to hunt. And predator vision is exquisitely tuned to detect motion.
So if a deer is walking through the woods at night and it hears a twig snap, its absolute best chance of survival isn't to run.
No, running triggers the predator's chase instinct immediately.
Right, so the deer's deepest, most successful biological strategy is to freeze. To just become a statue.
If it stands perfectly still, it blends into the visual noise of the trees and shadows. The wolf's visual cortex simply doesn't register the deer as a distinct object.
And the deer survives to pass on that genetic trait. For millions of years, freezing is a winning evolutionary ticket.
But then, in the blink of an evolutionary eye, we pave a highway right through that ancient forest.
Yeah, and we introduce a 2-ton machine made of steel, hurtling forward at 60 miles an hour, equipped with massive, blinding high-beam headlights.
This is the ultimate evolutionary mismatch. When that blinding light suddenly hits the deer's retinas, the nervous system is subjected to an overwhelming sensory overload.
The brain just short circuits.
Literally. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, screams that there is a massive immediate danger. But the brain doesn't have a file for speeding automobile.
It only has the ancient software.
Right, so it defaults to the deepest programming it possesses. Threat detected. Execute freeze protocol.
Oh, man. It stands perfectly still in the middle of the asphalt, staring blankly into the light, relying on a camouflage technique that is completely useless against a Ford F-150.
It's heartbreaking literally, but when we apply this idiomatically to humans, it perfectly describes a very specific kind of modern cognitive collapse.
Right. Think about a politician doing a routine live television interview. Everything is going fine. Suddenly, the journalist pulls out a completely unexpected question about a devastating embezzlement scandal.
The politician doesn't argue. They don't angrily storm off the set.
They just sit there, completely physically paralyzed on live television, mouth slightly open, eyes wide.
They are the deer.
I always think of this in terms of modern technology. Like, when you're working on a computer and suddenly the entire screen locks up and you get that little spinning wheel of death.
Oh, yeah. The worst.
Right. The hardware of the computer, the microchips, the motherboard isn't physically broken, but it is trying to execute a set of commands that are entirely incompatible with the modern application you just forced it to open.
So the system gets caught in a loop.
Exactly. It seems like the human freeze response is basically a biological spinning wheel of death.
Yeah.
Is that what's happening neurologically, or are we just crashing?
That analogy is highly accurate, actually. Neurologically, the freeze response, which is often called tonic immobility in the scientific literature, is a system crash caused by two conflicting commands firing simultaneously.
Oh, interesting. Two commands at once?
Yeah. When that journalist asks the shocking question, the politician's amygdala detects a career-ending threat. It instantly dumps adrenaline and cortisol into the bloodstream.
So the body's ready to go.
The sympathetic nervous system slams on the gas pedal, screaming, "Fight or flight!" Your heart rate spikes, your breathing quickens. You are biologically primed to either punch the journalist or sprint out of the studio.
But obviously, you can't do either of those things.
Exactly. You can't, because the prefrontal cortex, the logical, socialized part of the brain, is simultaneously slamming on the brakes.
It recognizes the social context.
It knows that physically attacking a reporter or running away from the cameras will result in absolute ruin. So you have the biological accelerator pressed to the floor and the social brake pressed to the floor at the exact same time.
Wow. So the result is total immobility.
A fatal processing error. You are trapped in the glare of the social headlights, unable to choose an action.
It's a terrifying loss of bodily autonomy, honestly.
Yeah.
Your brain knows you need to speak, you need to defend yourself, but the words just won't form.
It's a true paralysis.
So let's imagine you manage to avoid that initial system crash. You don't freeze. You recognize a massive threat is looming, but you refuse to stand still. This takes us to a secondary active state of panic.
Right, which relies on a wonderfully creepy piece of 19th century folklore.
Yes, whistling past the graveyard.
This moves us from the physiological paralysis of the deer into the psychological theater of denial.
Picture the setting for this idiom. It's midnight. The wind is howling. A person is walking home alone, and their path takes them directly past a very old, dark, overgrown cemetery.
Setting the scene.
Now, this person is completely terrified of ghosts, or perhaps just the dark and the isolation. The environment is actively triggering a massive fear response in their brain.
But observe the behavior here. Instead of breaking into a run or exhibiting the physical markers of panic, they purse their lips and they begin whistling a loud, highly cheerful tune as they stroll past the tombstones.
They are projecting a false reality of calm.
Completely false. We see this all the time in modern settings, especially in business.
Oh, for sure. Imagine a CEO reviewing the quarterly reports. Profits are down 40%. The company is bleeding cash. Investors are panicking. It is an absolute disaster.
A total crisis.
But instead of calling an emergency board meeting or restructuring, the CEO is sitting in their office casually flipping through a catalog, buying $100,000 worth of luxury, imported Italian furniture for the headquarters.
They are whistling past the graveyard.
It is the ultimate manifestation of cognitive dissonance. The brain cannot handle the immense stress of the impending financial ruin.
So it constructs a bizarre, cheerful micro-reality where everything is perfectly fine, and the biggest concern is the upholstery on a new chair.
But let me push back on this a bit, because I think this idiom gets an unfairly bad reputation.
Oh, how so?
What does it always have to mean foolish denial? If we go back to the literal 19th century person walking past the physical graveyard sometimes, putting on that cheerful facade is the only mechanical way you can force your legs to keep moving forward.
I see what you're saying.
Right. If you stop and allow the terror to wash over you, you might freeze, or you might collapse in a panic attack right there in the cemetery. Isn't whistling actually a highly evolved survival tool?
Well, from a purely physiological standpoint, you are making a fantastic point. When a person is terrified, their breathing becomes rapid and shallow.
Which signals to the brain that danger is present, creating a feedback loop of panic.
Right. But whistling requires a person to forcefully regulate their breath. It demands long, controlled exhales.
Which stimulates the vagus nerve.
Precisely. Long exhales stimulate the vagus nerve, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's relaxation response. It literally slows down the heart rate.
That's amazing.
So, in the short term, whistling is an incredibly effective coping mechanism to self-soothe and prevent a total nervous breakdown. It gives the walker a rhythm, a distraction, and physiological regulation.
Okay, so it actually works. Then why does the idiom carry such a heavy connotation of impending doom?
Because there is a profound difference between self-soothing to navigate a threat and self-delusion to pretend the threat doesn't exist.
Ah, I see.
Idiomatically, whistling past the graveyard implies intentional, willful ignorance of a structural danger. The CEO buying the furniture isn't doing deep breathing exercises to prepare for a grueling board meeting.
No, they are using a false cheerfulness to completely ignore the reality of bankruptcy.
Exactly. The creditors, the ghosts in this scenario, are still very real and they are still coming. The whistling doesn't eliminate the danger, it only temporarily blinds you to it.
That makes total sense. It's the difference between wearing a mask to filter out smoke while you fight a fire versus wearing a blindfold so you can pretend the house isn't burning down.
A perfect distinction. It is the mask of false bravery. And while that mask might hide your fear from your employees and even temporarily from yourself, the fire is still going to burn the house to the ground.
So we have the passive state, the frozen deer, and we have the state of active denial, the cheerful whistler. But courage requires something completely different.
It does. Courage demands that a person drops the false cheerfulness, steps out of the headlights, and actively engages with the threat.
This shifts the entire landscape from avoidance to confrontation. And historically, the language we use for this shifts from the dark woods and graveyards to the architecture of ancient blood sports.
Yeah, we are talking about the psychological magnitude of stepping into the lion's den.
The imagery here is so visceral. It traces back to the biblical story of Daniel being cast into the den of lions, sure. But it draws heavily on the structural reality of the gladiatorial arenas in ancient Rome, like the Colosseum.
If you look at the physical architecture of those spaces, a den is not an open field. It is a dark, enclosed pit.
Claustrophobic.
Very. The sensory experience is overwhelming the smell of dust, sweat, and blood. And lurking in the shadows are starving, highly aggressive apex predators.
Animals biologically driven and intentionally conditioned to tear a human being apart.
Most importantly, the den is designed so that once you cross the threshold, the gate drops. There's no escape route.
It is an engineered death sentence. Now, clearly, very few of us will ever face a literal hungry lion. But the way we apply this idiom modernly is incredibly potent.
How so? Give me an example.
Think about a lone union representative. They have been tasked with walking into a closed-door boardroom filled with incredibly hostile, high-powered corporate executives to negotiate a contract after a bitter strike.
Oh, that's intense.
Those executives hold immense power, they were furious, and they wanted to destroy the union's leverage. That boardroom is a modern lion's den.
It perfectly describes any fiercely hostile, intimidating environment where the power dynamics are heavily, almost fatally stacked against you.
What fascinates me here is the psychological contrast with our first idiom.
The deer.
Yeah. The deer in the headlights is ambushed. It has zero control over the arrival of the car. The deer is a victim of circumstance. But stepping into the lion's den, that requires physical agency.
You have to walk down the hallway, grab the brass handle of the boardroom door, turn it, and walk in.
You are consciously choosing the battlefield.
That is the defining characteristic of courage in this context. The critical word here is voluntarily.
Voluntarily.
The union representative is not being dragged into the room against their will. They possess absolute clarity about what awaits them.
They know they will be aggressively attacked, interrogated, and humiliated the moment they walk in.
And the biological alarm is screaming at them to walk away. Yet they fully calculate the risk and they consciously choose to cross the threshold anyway.
That premeditated engagement with danger, the agency of choice in the face of terror, is what separates a victim from a warrior.
It's the premeditation that makes it so psychologically heavy.
Yeah, you have to sit in the waiting room for 20 minutes, anticipating the lions, imagining the teeth, and still choose to stand up when your name is called.
Which requires an immense override of the self-preservation instinct.
But once you are inside that hostile environment, or before you even get there, a completely different psychological dynamic often emerges. And this is honestly one of the most brilliant concepts we're looking at today.
I agree. This next one is fascinating.
Because up until now, we've talked about the individual facing fear. But what happens when a group faces a threat? The English language has an idiom that perfectly captures the profound failure of collective courage.
The paradox of group dynamics, the classic question, who is going to bell the cat?
This comes straight out of ancient literature. It's an Aesop's fable. The story goes that a large group of mice are living in a house, and they were being terrorized by a stealthy, incredibly lethal house cat.
It keeps ambushing them, picking them off one by one.
So the mice hold a town hall meeting. They need a strategy. And a young, very enthusiastic mouse stands up and proposes what is objectively a brilliant plan.
It is a masterclass in strategic logic.
The young mouse says, "The root of our problem is that the cat is too quiet. We can't hear it coming. Therefore, all we have to do is procure a loud metal bell, attach it to a ribbon, and tie it tightly around the cat's neck.
If we do that, we will hear the cat ringing from 3 rooms away, and we will always have time to run to safety."
The logic is flawless. It addresses the root cause of the danger and provides a permanent, systemic solution.
So the mice go absolutely wild. They're cheering, clapping, celebrating. The crisis is averted. The plan is perfect.
But then, an old, quiet, battle-scarred mouse stands up in the back of the room. The cheering dies down, and the old mouse looks at the crowd and says, "Yes, it is a wonderful plan. The logic is entirely sound. But who is actually going to bell the cat?"
And the room falls into absolute suffocating silence.
Because the execution of the plan requires a single mouse to walk directly up to a waking killer predator and tie a ribbon around its neck.
It is a literal suicide mission.
And suddenly, not a single mouse in that cheering crowd is willing to participate.
We see this exact narrative play out in modern corporate environments, in political structures, and in social movements constantly.
Oh, all the time. Think about a toxic workplace. Imagine a team of 10 people working under a manager who is emotionally abusive, highly vindictive, and completely out of control.
The team gathers around the coffee machine or in private group chats. They document the abuse.
They all reach a firm, unanimous consensus. Someone has to report this manager to human resources immediately. They draft a perfect plan.
When the time comes to actually type the email, attach the documentation, sign a name at the bottom, and hit send, nobody will do it.
Right, so I have to ask you about the underlying psychology here. Why does group consensus so frequently fail to translate into individual action? It is baffling to watch a whole room of intelligent people cheer for a necessary plan, right up until the moment personal risk is required, at which point everyone just stares at their shoes.
Well, what you are describing is heavily rooted in evolutionary psychology and sociology. It is a phenomenon known as the diffusion of responsibility.
Oh, like the bystander effect.
Exactly. It's often linked to the bystander effect. When humans or mice operate in a group facing a shared threat, the perceived burden of action is psychologically fractured and distributed across all the members.
So nobody feels fully responsible.
Right. Everyone's brain is making a subconscious calculation. This is a serious problem, and someone definitely needs to solve it. But since there are 10 of us here, there is only a 10% chance that the someone has to be me.
So they feel like they've done their part just by agreeing the problem exists. I attended the brainstorming session. My contribution is complete.
Exactly. But the act of belling the cat requires a total inversion of that dynamic. The idiom highlights the terrifying tension between collective benefit and massive personal sacrifice.
Let's talk about the mathematics of that risk.
Yeah, think about it. The reward, a safe house for the mice, or a toxic-free workplace for the team, will be distributed equally among everyone, regardless of who did the work.
But the danger being eaten by the cat or being targeted and fired by the vindictive manager is borne 100% by the individual who steps forward.
The math is entirely irrational for the individual. You are asking one person to absorb the totality of the danger for a shared, fractional reward. From an evolutionary standpoint, that is a terrible survival strategy.
That is why the room goes silent. The idiom forces us to confront the vast, terrifying chasm between being a brilliant theoretician in the safety of the crowd and being the actual solitary practitioner of courage.
It is so easy to be brave, in theory.
It really is. But let's say someone actually does it. Let's say one person ignores the terrible math, steps out of the crowd, takes the bell, and successfully executes the mission.
They hit send on the HR email. They step into the lion's den.
What happens next? Because bravery doesn't exist in a vacuum.
No, it certainly does not. Inevitably, action provokes a reaction. When you challenge a power structure or when you confront a threat, the danger doesn't just politely evaporate because you were brave.
Right. In fact, bravery usually triggers immediate, severe retaliation.
which means the psychological challenge shifts from initiating action to surviving the fallout of that action.
How does a person endure the punishment for their courage? And historically, the language we use for this phase of survival is brutal.
The idiom is running the gauntlet.
This one is incredibly intense, and it originates from a very dark chapter of military history.
It does. The word gauntlet in this context actually comes from the Swedish word gatlopp, which translates roughly to lane course or street run.
It was a terrifying, highly ritualized military punishment popularized during the 30 Years' War in the 17th century, right?
Yes. Military history consistently provides us with our most visceral vocabulary for suffering and endurance. In the Swedish army, and later across Europe, if a soldier committed a crime, showed cowardice, or broke protocol, they didn't just quietly lock him in a cell.
No, they used a form of highly physical, deeply communal punishment designed to break the individual and enforce absolute conformity.
The physical setup is the stuff of nightmares.
The entire regiment, sometimes hundreds of men, would be ordered to form two long parallel lines facing each other, creating a narrow human corridor down the middle.
And the guilty soldier is stripped down to the waist. He is forced to physically run or walk down this narrow path between his own brothers in arms.
And as he moves, every single soldier in the line strikes him.
They weren't using their hands either. They were armed with heavy wooden sticks, thick leather belts, sometimes weapons with...
Wait, actual weapons?
Yeah, like knotted ropes. The objective was to inflict maximum agonizing pain from all sides, simultaneously, as the individual desperately tried to traverse the path.
And the psychological hook was this. If the soldier somehow managed to survive the run, if he made it to the end of the line without collapsing, bleeding out, or dying in the dirt, his sins were considered entirely forgiven.
He had paid the ultimate price and he was reinstated.
It's the ultimate primal test of pure endurance.
It really is.
You know, what stands out to me here when we think about how this applies to modern psychology is that the horror isn't just the physical pain of a single whip strike.
Right.
If you break your arm, it's a single moment of trauma. But the gauntlet is horrifying because of the communal aspect and the rhythm of it. The attacks are coming from your peers, from multiple directions, and it is a prolonged, sustained sequence. It is step, hit, recover, step, hit, recover.
That is a profoundly astute observation. The gauntlet is fundamentally different from jumping out of an airplane or running into a burning building.
Because those are explosive, single-decision moments of adrenaline.
Exactly. The gauntlet is a sustained environment of hostility. You have to actively choose to take the next step, knowing the next blow is coming. And that translates beautifully, if brutally, into how we use the phrase in modern high-level English.
We aren't talking about physical wooden sticks anymore.
No, we are talking about intellectual, emotional, or professional endurance.
A perfect example is academia. Think about a PhD student enduring her dissertation defense. She has spent 5 years of her life, endless nights, pouring her soul into this highly specific original research.
And now she has to sit in a small room and run the gauntlet of a panel of 5 brilliant, highly critical, tenured professors.
And their entire job in that room is to find the weak spots in her armor. They aggressively attack the methodology, they question the data, they challenge the conclusions.
If we map the physical military survival to that modern intellectual endurance, the core mechanism is exactly the same.
It is the stamina required to take a massive intellectual hit to your thesis, internalize it, recover instantly, answer the question articulately, and then immediately brace for the next hit from the next professor.
Over and over again for 3 exhausting hours.
It is the courage to keep moving forward when every single inch of progress results in a systemic attack. It requires a resilience that borders on the unnatural.
It really does.
So how does a person actually do that? How do you survive the gauntlet without just breaking down, crying, and collapsing in the middle of the room?
To answer that, the English language takes us away from biology and ancient military tactics and thrusts us right into the roaring furnaces of the Industrial Revolution.
To survive the gauntlet, the language dictates that one must possess nerves of steel.
I find this transition in the imagery so fascinating.
We are completely abandoning biology. We are comparing the internal human nervous system to metallurgy.
Because the human body is inherently frail. Under extreme pressure, biology dictates that we react. We shake, we tremble, we sweat, our heart rate spikes, our voice cracks, we panic.
Biology is inherently pliable. It is designed to be highly sensitive and reactive to changes in its environment.
But steel is not born, it is forged. It is created in blast furnaces at thousands of degrees.
And once it goes through that violent forging process, its crystalline structure changes. It becomes impenetrable.
It does not react to the temperature of the room. It does not bend under normal pressure. It is completely, totally unaffected by stress.
The classic modern example of this is the bomb disposal expert.
A truly terrifying profession.
Right. They are lying on the ground in a heavy suit, slowly clipping the final wire on a live, complex, explosive device. If their hand shakes even 1 millimeter, the circuit completes and they are vaporized.
But their hands do not shake. They have nerves of steel.
Their nervous system appears to mirror the structural integrity of industrial metal. But I really have to push back on the philosophical implications of this idiom.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because if we are saying that true bravery is having nerves of steel, does that suggest that to be courageous, we have to literally surrender our humanity? The phrase seems to imply that the only way to survive extreme pressure is to surgically remove our fragile biological empathy and fear and replace it with cold, unfeeling industrial machinery. Are we supposed to become sociopathic robots to survive the modern world?
That is a brilliant, deeply philosophical reading of the language and a very valid concern. If you take the metallurgy metaphor literally, yes, it suggests a chilling detachment from human emotion.
Right.
But neurologically and idiomatically, having nerves of steel doesn't mean you are a psychopath who is physiologically incapable of feeling fear.
Okay, then what is actually happening in the brain of the bomb expert?
It denotes an almost superhuman level of cognitive regulation. The fear is absolutely still firing in the amygdala. The bomb expert's brain is fully aware that they might die in the next 3 seconds.
The biological alarm is screaming
Loudly. But their prefrontal cortex, their executive function and cognitive control is so incredibly strong, so well trained, that it can completely suppress the physiological tremors.
It is the ability to remain absolutely calm, unflinching, and highly focused, despite the extreme danger trying to tear the system apart.
It is a triumph of mind over biology, not an erasure of biology.
So it's not that they don't feel the heat of the fire, it's that they have learned how to operate with absolute precision while standing inside the furnace.
Beautifully put, yes. The steel is a metaphor for the strength of the cognitive override, not the absence of the emotion.
Which brings us to the climax of our deep dive. We have moved from the paralyzing headlights to the false cheerfulness of the graveyard to choosing to walk into the lion's den to enduring the punishment of the gauntlet with nerves of steel.
Now, we arrive at the 2 highest, most cinematic displays of courage in the English language. These represent the ultimate stand.
The first of these final concepts takes us back once again to the ancient battlefield. But this time, it is not about punishment. It is about absolute defiance.
The idiom is holding your ground, or standing your ground.
And the historical imagery here is, frankly, terrifying to try and put yourself into. You have to picture a line of ancient Greek hoplites, or Roman infantry. A foot soldier is standing in a muddy field holding a heavy wooden spear and a shield.
They are the front line.
And they're looking across the expanse of the battlefield, watching a massive line of heavy enemy cavalry forming up. We are talking about hundreds of huge, armored war horses, ridden by warriors swinging weapons, beginning a charge at a full thundering sprint directly toward them.
The ground is literally shaking.
It is the ultimate stress test of the human nervous system. Think about the physics of what is approaching. 1,000 pounds of muscle and armor moving at 30 miles an hour.
Every single biological instinct that soldier has, honed over millions of years of evolution, is screaming at them to drop the heavy spear, turn their back, and run as fast as they can into the safety of the forest.
But survival, in this specific, highly structured context, dictates the exact opposite of instinct. The soldier cannot run.
No, if they want to live, they have to lock their shield with the soldier to their left and the soldier to their right, brace their legs deep in the dirt, and absolutely refuse to yield a single inch of ground, even as a wall of horseflesh crashes into them.
Because if we look at the structural mechanics of an infantry formation, bravery here is not isolated. It is inherently social. It is deeply interwoven.
Exactly.
How so? Explain the structure to me.
Well, a shield wall relies entirely on unbroken surface tension. If one single soldier gives into the terror, breaks the line, and runs away, a gap opens in the wall.
And the enemy cavalry immediately exploits that gap, pouring into the center of the formation.
Yes. The entire line collapses from the inside out, and the entire army is slaughtered. Therefore, holding your ground isn't just an act of personal macho defiance. It is the profound recognition that your individual courage is the load-bearing pillar for the survival of the entire community.
Wow. Your bravery is structural. If you fail, Everyone falls. That adds such a heavy weight to the concept.
It does. And when we bring this intense military metaphor into modern life, it usually takes place in a much quieter but equally high-stakes environment.
Think about a CEO in a brightly lit boardroom. The company is facing a massive PR crisis, and a faction of angry shareholders has called an emergency meeting.
They aggressively demand that she resign immediately. They are threatening her reputation, her career, her livelihood.
The cavalry is charging at her at full speed.
Exactly. And instead of resigning, instead of packing up her desk, drafting a weak apology, and running away from the conflict, she calmly stays in her seat at the head of the table.
She holds her ground. She looks them in the eye and methodically explains why her strategy is correct, despite the overwhelming threats and pressure to yield.
Idiomatically, to hold your ground means to stubbornly, immovably refuse to change your opinion, your morals, or your physical position, regardless of the severity of the opposition trying to force you backward.
I love this concept so much because it highlights a fascinating paradox in how we view strength. Yeah, in our modern culture, we are completely obsessed with forward momentum. Success is almost always framed in terms of movement. Moving forward, taking action, pushing ahead, disrupting.
Right, always moving.
But here, the ultimate display of courage, the absolute pinnacle of strength, is the radical act of staying perfectly, stubbornly still. It is the refusal to be moved by external pressure.
It is becoming an anchor in a raging storm, and that imagery provides a seamless transition to our final idiom, which takes the concept of the storm quite literally.
This is the grand finale of our linguistic journey. We've held our ground. We've braced against the impact. Now we do the unthinkable. We let go of everything. The phrase is throwing caution to the wind.
This is, without a doubt, the most romantic, breathtaking, and arguably dangerous metaphor in the English language regarding risk.
It originates from deep nautical history, from the era of massive, multi-masted wooden sailing galleons.
I want everyone listening to close their eyes and picture this scenario. You are a captain out on the open, unforgiving ocean. A massive, violent squall is rolling in. The sky is black, the waves are swelling, the wind is howling.
Now, a safe, cautious, rational sailing captain is going to look at that storm and calculate the physics. They're going to play it safe.
They will order the crew to climb the rigging, take those massive, heavy canvas sails, and tie them down tightly to the wooden masts.
It's a defense maneuver known as reefing the sails. You minimize the surface area exposed to the elements to protect the structural integrity of the ship.
Because if hurricane-force winds catch a fully open sail, the sheer kinetic force could snap the wooden masts in half, or capsize the vessel entirely, plunging everyone into the sea.
It's the smart play. It's the rational mathematical play. But then you have the brave, highly ambitious, and perhaps slightly reckless captain.
This captain doesn't want to just hunker down and survive the storm. They look at the violence of the wind and they see immense power.
They want to harness it for maximum speed to win a race or escape an enemy. So instead of tying everything down, they give the insane order to unfurl the massive sails. They completely let go of the ropes holding the canvas back, literally throwing their caution into the violent winds.
The visual is staggering. The wind catches that massive expanse of canvas with a sound like a cannon shot. The wood groans, the ship lifts heavily to the side, and it surges forward at a terrifying, almost uncontrollable speed.
It perfectly encapsulates the visceral feeling of taking a massive, all-or-nothing life risk.
A great, relatable, modern example of this doesn't involve the ocean at all. Imagine a guy who has been a highly conservative, risk-averse accountant for 20 years.
He lives in the suburbs, he has a steady 401k, a 30-year mortgage, a completely predictable, safe routine. He has tied down all the sails of his life.
But he has always secretly dreamed of being an actor.
One day, he wakes up, puts his house on the market, cashes out his entire retirement fund, drives to Hollywood with zero connections, and starts auditioning. He threw caution to the wind.
He untied the ropes. He exposed himself completely to the turbulent elements of a highly volatile industry.
But this raises a huge probing question for me. As we analyze this from a psychological perspective, where is the actual line between breathtaking bravery and pure, unadulterated, reckless madness?
It's a thin line.
Right. At this point, we aren't just facing fear, we are actively inviting disaster. If that ship's mast snaps, the crew drowns. If the accountant fails in Hollywood, he's 50 years old, bankrupt, and homeless. Is this really the pinnacle of courage? Or is it just foolishness masquerading as romance?
You have identified the ultimate tension of this idiom, and frankly, the tension of extreme human ambition. If we synthesize this as the final evolution of the fear response, it represents the complete and total abandonment of all safe, rational hesitation.
The accountant has deliberately stopped doing the math.
And the captain has deliberately stopped worrying about the structural integrity of the wood.
They just close their eyes and leap.
Exactly. They take a massive, wholehearted leap into the unknown. And to answer your question about where the line is between bravery and madness, the truth is the line is drawn entirely in retrospect, based on the outcome.
Oh, outcome bias.
Precisely. If the ship harnesses the storm, doesn't break, and makes it to port in record time, the captain is hailed in the history books as a brave, visionary genius.
If the mast snaps and the ship sinks, he is remembered as a reckless madman who killed his crew.
Throwing caution to the wind is the profound acceptance that you cannot guarantee the outcome, but you are willing to risk absolute destruction for the chance of achieving profound glory or fulfillment.
It is the adrenaline of a Hollywood blockbuster realized in the very real stakes of daily life.
You risk absolutely everything because the prospect of playing it safe is no longer a reality you can live with.
It's breathtaking. Wow. What an incredibly massive emotional and historical journey we have just taken. We started in the dark, ancient woods, exploring the paralyzing biological system crash of a deer caught in the headlights.
We observed the psychological theater of whistling past the graveyard, using false cheerfulness to mask a structural threat.
We moved into the realm of profound agency, voluntarily turning the doorknob and stepping into the lion's den.
We examined the lonely, paradoxical, and mathematically irrational burden of volunteering to bell the cat when the rest of the tribe stays silent.
We felt the physical and mental endurance required to run the gauntlet of our peers and the cognitive override necessary to forge nerves of steel to survive the furnace.
And finally, we explored the structural, communal strength of holding our ground against the charging cavalry before letting go of the ropes entirely and throwing caution into the violent wind.
It is genuinely amazing how perfectly language uses history to articulate our internal battles. Gladiators, soldiers, sailors, blast furnaces, these aren't just historical footnotes. They are the working vocabulary of our own psychology.
The language we speak is essentially the fossil record of human emotion. By understanding the idioms, we understand the architecture of our own minds.
I want to direct the core question of all this right back to you, the listener. Think about your own timeline. When was a specific moment in your life that you had to step into the lion's den?
Did you survive the gauntlet?
Have you ever truly thrown caution to the wind, risking absolute ruin for a dream, and looking back now, are you glad you did?
It is deeply beneficial to examine which of these historical idioms defines your current chapter of life. Are you firmly holding your ground against a charge, or are you currently paralyzed in the glare of the headlights?
And to wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over. We have just spent a while exploring how our deepest, most profound idioms for courage are anchored firmly in the distant past.
Ancient predators, cavalry charges, wooden sailing ships, the Industrial Revolution.
Those were the terrifying elements and triumphs of our ancestors. But think about the rapidly shifting world we live in today. What modern metaphors are being forged in the furnace right now?
That is a fascinating thought experiment. Language never stops evolving.
Exactly. We live in a digital, hyper-connected age. We deal with viral algorithms, artificial intelligence, digital footprints, cancel culture, cyber warfare. The fundamental nature of threat has completely transformed.
What new, terrifying imagery will the generations of the future use to describe the triumph of the human spirit?
Will our modern technological terrors create an entirely new vocabulary of bravery? 50 years from now, when someone faces a massive, overwhelming threat and freezes what will be the new deer in the headlights.
The landscape of fear is constantly shifting, which means the language of courage must inevitably evolve to match it.
So keep an eye on your own internal landscape. The biological mechanisms of bravery might remain ancient, but the muddy waters of the modern world are shifting fast. Until next time, stay brave, don't freeze in the glare, and thanks for diving deep with us today.